This episode, I'm chatting to Laura Yeates. Laura is a cardiac genetic counsellor and a current PhD candidate with research projects focusing on inherited cardiomyopathy and arrhythmias.
With genetic counselling, it's about talking you through the options so that you can make an informed decision that's right for you and your family. We'll do our best to help you understand all this information.
Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that we're recording on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We pass that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander listeners. Well, welcome to the podcast, Laura. Where are you joining us from?
Thanks so much. I'm on Gadigal land in Sydney.
Beautiful. Wonderful. So today we're going to learn all about genetic counselling. So can you just start by telling us what technically is genetic counselling?
Yeah, it's a great question. Genetic counselling is a communication process. It's where you learn, you find out more about a particular genetic condition that you might have or might be in your family. We talk about things like who's at risk of the genetic condition, who needs to be screened, what are the options for genetic testing, what's the chances of me having the condition or me passing it on to my children. So sort of anything to do with genetic disease and a genetic diagnosis. We help with things like adapting to a new diagnosis, how it might change different aspects of your life, whether that's a new medication or exercise restrictions, kind of a bit of everything, really.
Yeah, okay. So it's quite broad and quite in-depth. It sounds like you're taking into a lot of things. So just so I can understand it and our listeners can understand it, how is that different? Does the genetic testing or screening come first and then the counselling, or is it all happening together?
Yeah, great question. It can often be together. So genetic testing, I guess, is a really key part of genetic counselling, but you can see a genetic counsellor and decide not to have genetic testing. So it's just one part of what we're involved in. Sometimes you might meet with a genetic counsellor and the option of genetic testing isn't available to you. So we don't know the gene cause of the disease in your family, but you might want to talk about other things to do with your diagnosis. Sometimes genetic testing is available and people choose not to have genetic testing. Say if they're an at-risk relative and their sibling has a condition and actually they don't want to know if they carry the gene fault that causes that disease. That's perfectly reasonable. We talk to them about that and that is an option, and they might decide not to have genetic testing. So genetic testing is a big part of genetic counselling, but it's not the only part.
I see. Okay. I suppose I hadn't actually got my head around that. So it was great for you to explain it to me like that. So now I suppose if we bring it into the world, obviously we're on the HeartKids podcast.
Yeah.
What's the difference between genetic counselling and now cardiac genetic counselling?
Yeah, so I guess genetic counsellors are trained in all different types of inherited disease. So I myself have specialised in cardiac genetics, so heart disease, but my colleagues, some work in cancer, some work in renal, ophthalmology, another group work in general, so they do a bit of everything. We work across all areas of health. So I guess cardiac genetics focuses on conditions that primarily affect the heart. So my work is mostly inherited cardiomyopathy, so heart muscle disorders, or inherited arrhythmias, rhythm problems of the heart that run in families.
Okay, so obviously the study starts out to be quite broad. So as you said, it's quite general. And then you've obviously fallen in love, for the want of a better word, or took a real interest in obviously matters of the heart, which I can say as a parent, and I'm sure to everyone listening, we're very grateful for anyone who falls in love with the heart and knowing more about it, because then we can obviously be empowered, can't we? And I know there'll be people listening who have siblings. Hearing from someone like you, it's great to know there is that avenue for a sibling to come and speak to you if their sibling has something that's been genetically involved in the heart. So how do we bridge that gap to go from we've got a diagnosis, we need to know more? How do we get in contact with you? How do we start this process of genetic counselling about those heart conditions?
Yes, great question. It depends a bit on the type of heart condition that you have in your family. So the best place to start is actually with your GP. You will need a referral to get to a genetic service. And so going into your GP and asking your GP, should I see a genetic counsellor? Should I have genetic testing? because they'll be able to help you knowing you and your diagnosis, whether that's something that could be helpful for your family. And then there are genetic services all around Australia. There's a great website by the Centre for Genetics Education, which is just genetics.edu.au, and they have a Find a Genetic Counsellor service. So you can put in your postcode and it will bring up the genetic counselling service closest to you. That they're usually in the capital cities, although there are some in the major regional centres, or they have outreach clinics to some of the rural places from, like the metro centres. But head to your GP is
amazing.
The best place to start.
The first step. Okay, so that's the first step. But that's amazing that you've even just said that you can just type in and put in your postcode. It's almost like find a genetic counsellor near me in Google.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I've made it sound super easy. There is a bit of a wait to get into a genetic counsellor, but most of them are public services. So like any service, there's a wait time. But if your GP sends in, the more information, the better. That will just help the team at the other end receiving that triage, that referral appropriately. And, sometimes they'll read the information and go, actually, you might not need to see us. And they'll give you a phone call and just discuss a few things over the phone without needing an appointment. Say if genetic testing's not available for your condition, or they'll work it out on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. So the pathway for anyone listening is if there is a possibility of some sort of genetic cardiac gene within the family, the first point of call would be to go to your GP. GP would put through a referral, and then it would either be picked up from there. So it's obviously something that's fairly new in the scheme of things. Like obviously heart babies have been around. We've been around for a long time, referred to as blue babies and so forth. And obviously now with the advancements in, medical science, and clearly now you're doing your PhD around this, are we seeing more, or is it just that it's always been there, we just haven't known which gene has caused certain conditions?
Yeah, I would say it's the latter. We understand a lot more about genetics than, say, we did even 20, 30 years ago. Genetic counselling as a profession in Australia has been around for about between 25 and 30 years. We just had our 25th birthday a few years ago. So we're relatively new. But in terms of cardiac genetic testing, it's going ahead in leaps and bounds. I started in the profession 16 years ago, and we used to do research testing. We'd do a couple of genes. It would take a couple of years. We might not get an answer. It was terrible. Now we can do a full genome, so we can look at, someone's entire genetic information in a relatively short amount of time. We can get that raw data back, a couple of months or 6 to 8 weeks. Analyzing that genome and the genetic data and trying to work out which changes in the DNA are just benign variation. So the tricky part is we all have changes in our DNA. Some of them don't do anything and some of them cause disease. So we need to spend a lot of time looking at those changes and trying to work out, okay, is that just benign variation? Is it why there's a redhead in a family when there hasn't been a redhead before? Or is it something that's causing a heart problem? So that's probably the biggest area that we've learned a lot, particularly in the last 10 years, about new genes, about how to classify those changes in the DNA that we find. And particularly in all types of heart disease, we've just really gone ahead in leaps and bounds in congenital heart disease, in the cardiomyopathies and rhythm problems as well. It's an exciting space to work in.
It really is. And like you said, it is a young profession. Like you're saying, 25, 30 years in the scheme of things, it's amazing that we have that technology and we have people like yourself dedicating your lives and profession to it. What's the time frame? So you obviously stepped me through. So say I've gone to the GP, I've been very lucky to fall under your care. So you do the testing, you send it off. Are you sending it off in Australia? Or is it going overseas?
Yeah, great question. It depends on the condition. There's a few cardiac genetic tests for cardiomyopathy and arrhythmia that's just come available on the MBS, so covered by Medicare, so no cost.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's really good. It's a small number of genes. It's sort of the low-hanging fruit of, if you've got a clear diagnosis of one of the conditions, the most likely place we're going to find it. So we can do much bigger panels. And it really depends on the condition that a person has. We may sometimes services will send overseas and do bigger panels, or it really depends on the person and the heart condition that they're looking for genes, I guess, or changes in genes in a particular area because of the person's diagnosis. So I guess in thinking about whether you need to have genetic testing, we always like to start genetic testing in the person who has the diagnosis themselves, not a relative, because the pickup rate is not 100%. We don't always find the gene fault causing their disease. And so if we started in a relative who doesn't have the condition to see if they're at risk and we don't find anything, we don't know if that's because they actually don't have that gene fault and we were never going to find it, or if it's that we just didn't look in the right place or the right gene. So by starting with someone who has the diagnosis and testing them, we sort of eliminate one of those possibilities. If we think there's a genetic basis, then we go looking in their genes to see if we can find it.
Yeah, it's quite logical, isn't it? It makes a lot of sense to me that we all shouldn't be just rushing out asking our GP for referral to come and see someone like yourself. So really it should start with exactly that, the person who has the diagnosis. That's great. That's great advice. If, say, I was in that position, what would I expect from that first initial meeting with you?
Yeah, so we'd talk a little bit about your condition and how you were diagnosed. Sometimes knowing how someone presents, was it, say, an incidental finding, you were going for a heart checkup and you had an abnormal ECG and they found a rhythm problem of the heart? Were you symptomatic at a young age, say after exercise, and you were getting dizzy and lightheaded? These are things that help us try and work out which genes we want to look in. Sometimes we can get some clues. A lot of the testing still will throw the net quite wide. We'll look at a group of genes, but we like to ask you a bit about your clinical history and your story because it can give us clues sometimes. You have to be a bit of a detective trying to find the gene fault causing disease. At the appointment, then we'd then ask you about your family history. Who's in your family? Do you have a partner? Are you married? Do you have 10 siblings or are you an only child? And that can range from, I have people who are adopted and know nothing of their birth, their DNA family, through to people who bring in, a sixth generation. They go back.
Family tree book.
Family tree. It's huge, like
this is when we arrived on the boat.
Between.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. We take everything in between. I guess the more information you have on your sort of immediate family, so your first degree relatives, so parents, siblings, children, or any aunts, uncles, cousins who have the same thing as you can be really helpful. Or even if you know that they have a heart problem, knowing things like what type of heart problem they have, the diagnosis, and what age they were diagnosed, again, can just give us a little bit of clues for when we're looking in the genes and the DNA about which gene might be in play or might be a cause, where the gene fault might be.
Okay, that's great. So I suppose that's something to really take away from this conversation is if you are going on that journey and you're going down that path, it's probably great to even maybe have that conversation with your GP to say, could I get my family history if perchance your family has been going to that same GP practice, or from your parents as well, or like you said, that immediate thing, so that you come, I suppose, armed with more information. So like you said, you can do your best detective work.
Yeah, that's right. Probably starting with your family members is going to be easier than through your GP because your GP has to abide by the confidentiality, rules of your siblings. Say you see the same GP, they can't disclose anything to you without written consent. It's probably easier for you to just ask your sibling to clarify some of those details.
Excellent. No, that's great. That's great for us to know. So if we've gone through that process with you, Laura, where do we go from here? So I've come to you, you've got my family tree, you know which area of genes that you want to investigate further. You then find something. And this is something like, I suppose, in the case of cardiomyopathy and arrhythmias, this potentially is lifelong. How long am I involved with you? How long am I under your care?
So I guess it depends. Let's say we take the family history, we're able to offer you genetic testing. There's a bit of paperwork that would go through the consent process. What are the possible results we might find? We might find nothing in our testing. We might find a cause of your disease, but we might also find a result where we call it uncertain. We don't know what it means, and it's a bit of a wait and see. So we go through all of those things, order the test, and the test is usually a blood sample, or we can do a cheek swab, like a inside the mouth cheek swab, like a COVID swab, I guess, but not up the nose, on the inside.
We're used to those swabs now, aren't we?
We are, but this one's
We've even got them at home
pleasant.
Now, haven't we? We've even got those rat tests at home now.
We do. But similar sort of thing. So that we send that off. It's sort of, depending on the test and where it goes, it can take sort of and the lab between 6 to 12 weeks for that result to come back. We'll see you again to discuss the result and one of those findings. And I guess then it's really up to you. Say you have children and you're interested in having them tested, or you're planning a family and want to talk through the options there in terms of if we find the gene fault causing disease, whether you might use that. Some families consider pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, so a process via IVF.
Oh, wow.
Where you can check the embryos for the presence or the absence of the gene fault and then only implant the ones that don't have it and thereby not pass it on to the next generation. So there are options like that. They're not for everybody. The heart conditions is they can affect people very differently. So some people are very keen to go down that process. Others are like, no, I'm fine. Like, I live with this. This is okay. We'll just roll the dice and have families the usual way and check kids when they're born. So there's no right or wrong. With genetic counselling, it's about talking you through the options so that you can make an informed decision that's right for you and your family. We're not here to pass judgment. This is just us trying to equip you with the information of quite technical stuff. And you don't need to have a PhD in genetics. You don't need to. We'll do our best to help you understand all this information so that you can make the decisions moving forward. So most people would probably see a genetic counsellor throughout that process, like so over a few months, and then you might not need to see us again. I work in a clinic alongside cardiologists, so I'm a bit different in that patients or families come back to us for their regular cardiology check. So I think it's quite fun because I've seen, teenage kids grow up and then they come in, they would say, Laura, I've got a partner. Can we talk about having kids now? And so in the beginning, it might have been, they weren't allowed to play all the sports that they wanted to play. And then as they've grown up, there's new issues that arise. So we're kind of there as you need us, but we're not an ongoing counsellor. If it was something going on where you felt you needed ongoing psychological support, then we'd refer you to one of our clinical psychologist colleagues.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's great for you to clarify that. You're there, you're a part of, I suppose, that diagnosis and team, and you're there in the background for when we need to tap back into you. And so that's lovely how you shared how you see people come through and you see them grow up and now they want to start a family. That was actually the one thing I was thinking of as you're talking about that. In your career, you must have seen some things and gone, gosh, we couldn't diagnose that, or we couldn't work out that gene, where that gene came from when I first started my career. So what's some marvels that you've come across in your career?
Oh, I think just exactly what you said. When we couldn't find the genetic cause and it took us a few years and then we find it, it's just amazing to finally, I guess, find what we've been looking for.
And probably provide that answer.
Yeah. We've finally worked it out. Sometimes you get lucky and you find it the first go really easily, but other times it's taken us a little while, and the options that then has for the family. So if we find the gene fault causing disease, say the sibling who might have a normal heart at the moment, but is having screening every 2 to 3 years or something, they can have a genetic test to see if they carry that gene fault and are at risk of developing disease. If they do carry that gene fault, we keep doing what we're doing, we keep watching them. But if they don't carry that gene fault, then we can release them from clinical screening. And so that means they also can't pass the condition on to their children because you can't pass on something you don't have. So there's a lot of utility in that. Yeah, finding that answer is really rewarding and important, and it's great. There's lots of stories, but it can take time as we learn more. There's new genes that we didn't know about, 5 years ago that we're now testing for. We knew they were there, but we didn't know what they did. And so making those discoveries and being a part of that is just really exciting.
Yeah, and I can tell for those listening, I'm in a studio in Adelaide and Laura, as she said, is in Sydney. But to see your face actually light up as you talk about it really warms my heart. And I hope that everyone can hear that in your voice, because it's clear that it probably just reaffirms what you do every day, and to be able to provide that guidance and answers for those families that are looking for answers.
Yeah, it's amazing because often it won't change the medical management of the person who has the condition, but just knowing finally understanding the cause. It's nothing that you've done. It's nothing that your mum did when she was pregnant. In all of these conditions, there's no blame. This is just sometimes with a genetic condition, with unfinished business in heart development, these things can happen. But finding the cause of that, a cause that gives utility to other members of the family, yeah, it's rewarding.
Yeah. And it provides peace of mind as well. So with this testing, so sometimes we hear people talk about if something's genetic or chromosomal. Can you talk us through the difference of that?
Yeah, sure. So the way I think about it is if genetics and your genome is a whole big book,
yes,
that makes your body work, chromosomes are kind of like the volumes of the book. When I first trained, one of the examples was the old Encyclopedia Britannica.
Love it. We're of the same era then.
Yeah.
You're talking my language, yes.
If I say that to a teenager now, they look at me like, what's that?
What?
So the other way to think about it is like Harry Potter, there's 7 volumes of Harry Potter. So each volume might be a chromosome, and then the chromosome contains the genetic information. So the genetic information is a bit like with our big book, I think of genes like chapters of our book, except it gets more complicated because you get one copy of each gene or your book, one copy from mum and one from dad. The books, they come in pairs. This is where the analogy falls down, and that's why Encyclopedia Britannica kind of worked better because there were lots of volumes.
I'm with you. And I actually think that's probably one of the best analogies and visuals. I'm a very visual person. So I've got a great visual now. I've got the Britannias, and I can definitely see, okay, so each volume is a chromosome. And when I open up that book, the genes are in there.
Yeah, the body reads the message, the genes, and knows what to do. So sometimes what we're doing, we pull the book off the shelf, open it to a page, and there's a spelling mistake. It can be as simple as an A becoming a T. It changes the message the body
receives,
and causes disease.
Got you.
So sometimes when there's a chromosome abnormality that's causing the issue, sometimes, 2 bits of the chromosome, so maybe 2 volumes have been pulled off the shelf and a part of one's swapped places with a part of the other, a bit like ripping out the first 5 chapters of, say, volume 10 and then taking volume 6 and ripping out the last 5 chapters and swapping them over. That might be what we call a chromosome rearrangement. Sometimes there's an extra chromosome. We might have a whole extra volume.
Amazing. Thank you.
It's easier with pictures.
It is, but I really, really loved that. I really did. So, Laura, you're clearly extremely passionate about this. You wouldn't have dedicated, obviously, so much study and your time. So tell me more about your current research and why you're so interested in completing that PhD.
Yeah, when I started my PhD, I'd been working for about 12 years. So my PhD focuses on genetic heart disease, but particularly my main project is developing a support intervention for families where someone has passed away suddenly. So you hear of that happening, on the football field, or you might hear of young people who were previously well who die suddenly. And I guess I was in a point in my career, I'd worked with these families for many years and seen just the devastation. And they kept asking me, are there any support groups? Is there anything in Australia? There's groups around the world, particularly in the UK, but not so much here. There is one group called NGCD that we're starting to do some work with as well. But I was like, if I'm going to do a PhD, I need to build this support mechanism or intervention, whatever you want to call it. And so that's what I did.
Wonderful.
And I needed a bit of a change. Work-wise, needed a new challenge, which I know just makes me sound like a really big geek by doing a PhD.
Not at all. We're very grateful for you.
It was just something I was really passionate about. And so over the last 3 years, we've started developing, we used with co-design. So we talked to some families, we talked to healthcare professionals who care for these families, asking about what they want. And so we've developed a support intervention and we're in the process of piloting it. I've just finished the pilot. And so we're just trying to fix everything up for it and then we'll launch it. It involves a website that's not live yet and then some online sort of support sessions where we provide an opportunity for families to meet each other and have some peer support, but also give some information.
That sounds brilliant. That sounds amazing. And I suppose if I can bring it all together, you've dedicated your life, your career to this. You've already seen, for such a young profession, you've already seen so much evolve. And it's so wonderful to hear you on that journey recognise where the gaps are. And you've recognised a gap. You've then gone, well, do you know what? I'm just going to study and I'm actually going to try and resolve this, obviously, to a point. And I love the fact that you said co-design. I think that's so important. It's so important that we all need a voice around that table.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that journey, that patient journey, that whole clinical journey, we need to see. The good thing is it's becoming more and more common, isn't it, Laura? Co-designing wasn't as common, and consumer advocacy and all those things, weren't as common. So to think, like, you guys must be looked upon from your peers like, geez, these new guys, they've only been around for 25 years and look at them. They're already at website level of creating groups and, roundtable discussion. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think people are, in medical research in general, people are recognizing the power of co-design. Like, because I work so closely, we've always coupled our clinical care with our research. So our patient voice was always in the back of my mind. How can I help more? But having consumers involved in the research just made it so much richer. We learned so much more, and just hearing their experience, and we just really appreciated them, our participants, taking the time to help us and build this. And I think it means the end outcome will be better for it. And I would challenge actually all researchers who are, whether you're writing a booklet to help people understand their genetic test results better, or how to communicate with your family, whatever your intervention is, you're crazy not to include the consumers and the patient voice, because you learn so much. So I'm a massive champion for it now. And whenever I see projects, that's one of my first questions. Where's your consumers? Get them involved.
Wonderful. No, and that's so wonderful to hear, because that's a really lovely thing for us to be a part of, that holistic care. Because it is, isn't it? It needs to be holistic. We're on the journey, and we rely so heavily on yourselves and professionals and clinicians who have dedicated their life to understanding things from a technical perspective, to then we bring the lived experience, the outcome. And if you think about, if we had this conversation in 10 years' time, once your pilot is no longer a pilot, it's now just a matter of course. Be great to chat to you back then,
Oh, wouldn't that be great?
Wouldn't that be great? And in time, and say, look at how many people were helped along this journey and their questions answered. So thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. So in wrapping up for our listeners, so the role of, in your case, a cardiac genetic counsellor, it really starts with the person who's being diagnosed, and then involving your healthcare professionals like your GP. And obviously, like you said, you work so closely in your clinic with obviously cardiologists, and then starting that journey to unpack those books, take them off the shelf, give them a bit of a dust, work out if something's being put in the wrong order, and then, hopefully find some answers. As you said, it's not always an answer. We're not going to solve it, are we?
Not always. But I guess it's important to ask the question, could this be genetic? But particularly the conditions I work in, say the inherited cardiomyopathies, first-degree relatives are at a 1 in 2 or 50% risk of having the same condition. So it's not just about you. It's also like, actually, are my siblings at risk? They should be checked. And even if they had got checked 20 years ago, we now know that some people develop it later in life. And so if you have a cardiomyopathy and you were told you got checked once and you were given the all clear, we now know that actually we should check you again. So just having those conversations with your healthcare professionals. I should say cardiologists can also refer you to genetic counselling. They can order the MBS genetic testing, but I guess the benefit of having a genetic counsellor involved in that process, I think, is good for everyone. So head into your GP, or you could also ask your cardiologist. They can also refer you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And I really look forward for people listening to this and getting more insights.
Thank you for having me. And thanks for all the great work of HeartKids. We love you guys. We really appreciate all you do. And I love seeing the cute pictures of what all the kids are up to, because they look like they have a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sometimes this podcast talks about some heavy things. If this brings up anything for you or someone you love, it is important to reach out for support. The HeartKids helpline provides support and guidance for anyone impacted by CHD. You can call the helpline on 1800 432 785. To access more information about CHD, as well as support from HeartKids, visit the website at heartkids.org.au. The information on this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice from your doctor or healthcare team. Always talk to your doctor about matters that affect you or your family's health.